She said it in front of everyone. Not quietly, not as a whisper meant only for me. She said it loud enough for her sister to hear, loud enough for the photographer to pause, loud enough for a table full of people who had been smiling a second before to suddenly go very still. "Seth, can you just step out? Your face is ruining the aesthetic." 43 years old, a man who had spent 15 years building a life with this woman, buying a house with her in Fort Collins, Colorado, planting every tree in her garden with his own hands, showing up to every birthday, every dinner, every obligation she ever had. And she looked at me like I was an inconvenient smudge on the frame of her life. So I stepped out. And then I kept stepping. Out of the backyard, through the side gate, down the driveway, into my truck. And I drove away without looking back. I want to tell you the whole story, because what happened in that backyard was not the beginning. It was the end. And everything that came before it, every small humiliation, every quiet surrender, every moment I told myself I was being too sensitive, all of it had been building toward that one sentence. Before we get into it, if you're new here, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, because every week we share stories like this one, real, raw, and honest, about the moments that change everything. And if this story hits close to home, leave a comment below. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Seth Calloway. I'm a landscape architect based in Fort Collins, Colorado. I design outdoor spaces for a living, parks, corporate campuses, private estates. I've always loved the idea that you can take an ordinary piece of land and turn it into something that makes people feel something. Peaceful, alive, connected. I grew up in Greeley, about 40 miles east of Fort Collins, in one of those flat, wide-sky towns where the only interesting topography was what you made yourself. My father worked for an irrigation company. My mother taught middle school science. We had a quarter-acre lot with a backyard that my father had turned, over the course of my entire childhood, into something extraordinary. Vegetable beds, a small orchard, a flagstone path he'd laid entirely by hand one summer when he was trying to work through something he wouldn't talk about. I used to watch him out there and think that a man who could make something grow out of nothing was a man who understood something important about the world. I became a landscape architect because of that backyard, because of those quiet hours watching my father decide, stone by stone, where things went and why. I met Adrienne Pierce at a design expo in Denver 11 years ago. She worked in interior design, and we were both presenting at the same conference. She was stunning. Dark hair, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately recalibrates the energy in it. We talked for 3 hours that night at the hotel bar. She was funny and opinionated, and she laughed at things that weren't obviously funny, which I've always thought is the real test. I asked for her number. She made me wait a week before responding. I should have understood then that waiting was going to be a recurring theme in our relationship. Waiting for her approval, waiting for warmth, waiting for a version of her that showed up in glimpses, on vacation, on good days in the early years, and then retreated without explanation. We got married 4 years after we met, in a vineyard outside of Loveland, up near the foothills, the kind of place where the light in late afternoon turns everything golden, and the mountains are visible on the western horizon like a promise. Small ceremony, maybe 60 people, close friends and family. Adrienne had planned the entire thing, and it was genuinely beautiful. She had an eye for those things. The flowers, the lighting, the table arrangements, everything was perfect. I remember standing at the altar watching her walk down the aisle and feeling, for the first time in my adult life, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That feeling lasted about 2 years. The changes didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about slow erosion. You don't notice the ground disappearing until you're already standing at the edge. Adrienne had always been particular. She had opinions about how things looked, how events were presented, how our home appeared to other people. That was part of what drew me to her. She cared about beauty. She had taste. But somewhere around year 3 of our marriage, particular became critical, and critical became relentless. It started small. A comment about the way I dressed for her work dinners. Nothing cruel, just a suggestion. Maybe wear the blue jacket instead of the gray one. Fine. I wore the blue jacket. Then it was my haircut. Too casual for the neighborhood association event she was attending. She said it lightly, laughing, and I laughed too, even though something about it sat wrong in my chest. Then it was the way I told stories at dinner parties. Too long. Too many details. She'd touch my arm and redirect the conversation, smooth as silk, and her friends would never notice, but I noticed. Then it was the hiking photos. She had started an Instagram page documenting what she called our curated life, the house renovations, the travel, the garden. She was good at it. She had thousands of followers. People in the Fort Collins design community knew her handle before they knew her name. She posted our kitchen renovation in stages, each phase lit beautifully, every material choice explained with the kind of warm authority that makes people feel like they're getting instruction and companionship at the same time. She was talented at it. I don't want to undercut that. But I noticed that over time, the photos of us together started getting replaced by photos of just her, or of the spaces around us without either of us in them. The garden I'd designed, my work, my hands, sometimes entire weekends of my labor, appeared constantly. But I was largely invisible within it. The caption would say something like, "Our little sanctuary," without any particular acknowledgement of the person who'd spent 3 years building it. When I asked about it once, she said the algorithm preferred lifestyle content over personal photos. I believed her. I was good at believing her. Looking back, I think I was so invested in the narrative of a good marriage, in the idea that we were two creative professionals who had figured something out, that I kept choosing the most generous possible interpretation of every signal. Because the alternative required a conversation I didn't know how to start, and because some part of me was afraid that if I started it, I'd find out something I wasn't ready to know. I want to be honest about something, because I think these stories are only useful if we tell the whole truth. I am not a perfect man. I work long hours. During busy seasons, which in landscape architecture means roughly April through October in Colorado, I am gone before sunrise and home after dark. I missed dinners. I missed weekends. I canceled a trip to Santa Fe that we'd been planning for months because a major project deadline landed on the same week. Adrian was angry about that, rightfully so. I apologized. I meant it. But here's the thing I've come to understand only recently. There is a difference between someone being angry at you because you hurt them and someone being angry at you because you exist in a way that inconveniences their preferred version of their life. Adrian was both, and for years I only accounted for the first kind. The year before the birthday party, things had shifted significantly. Adrian had grown her design business substantially. She had picked up a few high-profile clients. A tech couple who'd bought a historic property in Cherry Hills Village, a restaurant group that wanted her to concept their new location in Rhino. She was successful, and I was proud of her. Genuinely. But success for Adrian came with an increasingly sharp divide between the life she wanted to be seen living and the life we were actually living. She started spending more time in Denver, staying over at her friend Courtney's place after client dinners, coming home with stories about galleries and rooftop restaurants and people with names I didn't recognize, telling them with an energy she never quite brought home anymore. We stopped eating dinner together most nights, not because of a fight, just because schedules didn't align, or so I told myself. My friend Dale, we'd known each other since college, he runs a civil engineering firm in Boulder, told me during a hike one Saturday that I seemed like a man who had been slowly talked out of his own instincts. We were on the Horsetooth Rock Trail, maybe a mile from the summit, and he said it the way Dale says everything. Directly, without cruelty, as though he's simply observing what he sees and expects you to do something useful with the information. You used to have opinions about things, he said. You used to push back on stuff. Now you just agree. Every time I mention Adrienne, you agree with whatever version of the story makes her the most comfortable. I told him he was wrong. He nodded and let it go. I thought about what he said for the rest of that hike and most of the drive home. I didn't know what he meant then. I do now. Adrienne's 40th birthday. She planned the party herself, which was not surprising. She planned everything herself. Control was her primary language, and I'd learned a long time ago to operate in the space she allowed rather than trying to occupy more of it. The party was in our backyard, the house we owned together in Fort Collins, a craftsman on a double lot that I had, over 7 years, transformed from a dead patch of grass and a dying ash tree into one of the most genuinely beautiful residential landscapes I'd ever designed. Every plant chosen deliberately. The flagstone patio I'd laid myself, one weekend in June 3 years ago, stone by stone. The raised beds along the south fence where she grew tomatoes every summer. The pergola we'd built together the year after we moved in, when things were still good, both of us covered in sawdust and laughing. She had hired a caterer, a photographer, a bartender, String lights from the pergola to the fence line. Flower arrangements on every table. 40 people, roughly. All of them from her world. Her clients, her colleagues, her design school friends, Courtney and her husband, a couple I'd never met who'd apparently just returned from 18 months in Portugal. I knew maybe 6 people at my wife's birthday party. I stood at the edge of conversations all evening, smiling when someone made eye contact, laughing at things I hadn't fully heard. This had become, I realized, a familiar feeling, being present at my own life without quite being included in it. There was a man there named Garrett, a developer Adrian had been working with on the Cherry Hills project, who talked to me for about 15 minutes near the bar. He was genuinely interesting, actually, a guy who'd grown up in Oklahoma and had opinions about water rights in the West that overlapped significantly with work I'd been doing around drought-tolerant landscaping. We had an actual conversation. He asked me real questions. For 15 minutes, I felt like a person at the party instead of a prop at it. Then Adrian drifted past and said something about how she'd been looking everywhere for Garrett, and steered him toward a cluster of people near the catering table, and I was alone again with my drink, and the string lights, and the flagstone I'd laid with my own hands. Adrienne was radiant. She moved through the party the way she always moved through spaces she'd designed, with the confidence of someone who knows exactly how everything looks and has arranged it to be looked at. She was funny and generous with her guests. She remembered names and details. She made people feel seen. I watched her do it and felt something I couldn't quite name, not jealousy exactly, but a kind of grief. Because that woman was in there, the one who made people feel seen. She just hadn't pointed that quality in my direction in a long time. Around 9 o'clock, someone suggested a group photo. 20 or so people gathered near the pergola. The photographer, a young woman Adrienne had hired specifically for the party, was arranging us, adjusting angles, asking people to move closer together. I was standing at the edge of the group, on Adrienne's left. She glanced at me, and then she said it. "Seth, can you just step out? Your face is ruining the aesthetic." There was a beat. Half a second. A moment where everything held its breath. Then someone laughed a little. Nervous laugh, not a mean one, the kind people make when they don't know what else to do. Courtney, standing next to Adrienne, looked at the ground. I looked at Adrienne. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't joking in a way where the joke part would follow. She was already turning back toward the camera, adjusting her posture, waiting for me to comply so the moment could move on. So I stepped out of the frame, and I kept walking. I didn't make a scene. I didn't say anything. I walked through the side gate of my own backyard, the gate I'd hung myself, the hinges I'd replaced twice, and I walked down the driveway to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment. The noise from the party was audible from where I was parked. Music, voices, laughter. I started the truck and drove north on Shield Street. I didn't have a destination, I just drove. Past the Horsetooth Reservoir turnoff, past the neighborhoods where I'd done some of my earlier commercial work, past the edge of town where Fort Collins starts turning back into the high plains, flat and open and indifferent in a way I found, at that moment, genuinely comforting. I called Dale. He picked up on the second ring. "You okay?" he asked, even before I'd said anything beyond his name, which told me he'd been waiting for a call like this for longer than I had. I want to stop here for a moment and say something directly, because you might be reading this and thinking, it was one comment, an awkward, thoughtless comment at a party. People say things. Maybe she was nervous. Maybe she was being careless. Maybe it came out wrong. I thought all of those things while I was driving. And then I thought about the 7 years of smaller comments that came before it. The redirected conversations, the Instagram page that had quietly edited me out, the parties where I knew no one, the weekends she was in Denver, the trip to Santa Fe I canceled and she never fully forgave. A single comment does not end a marriage, but a single comment can be the moment you finally hear clearly what has been said quietly for years. That's what happened to me on that driveway. I didn't have a revelation. I had a recognition. The recognition that I had been standing at the edge of my own life for a very long time, and I had been calling that standing patience. It wasn't patience. It was disappearance. Dale and I drove out to a place neither of us had planned to go, a bar near Timnath called the Foothills, the kind of place with a decent draft list and a pool table in the back, and no one who cares what you look like or who you're married to. We found a corner table and he didn't ask me too many questions at once. That's always been what I appreciate most about Dale. He has a contractor's understanding of load-bearing walls. He knows which questions are structural and which ones can wait. "Is this the end?" he asked eventually. I thought about the pergola, the flagstone, the raised beds, the ash tree I'd nursed back from near death with 3 years of soil amendments and careful pruning. "I don't know," I said, "but I think I'm done pretending it isn't what it is." He nodded and bought us each another beer. Around 11:30, my phone lit up. It was a text from a woman named Priya, one of Adrian's friends, a graphic designer who I'd always liked, one of the few people at those parties who ever actually talked to me like a person. The text said, "Seth, she's still crying. I don't know what's happening between you two, but she's really upset. Are you okay?" I read it twice. I put the phone face down on the table. "She's crying," I told Dale. He looked at me. "What do you want to do with that information?" It was the right question, and for the first time in years, I knew the answer. Nothing. I wanted to do nothing with it. Not because I didn't feel anything. I did. I felt a complicated grief that I don't think has a clean name, but because the information had arrived too late and from the wrong direction. If the tears existed, they should have arrived before the comment, before the slow editorial removal of me from the visual record of our life, before every party where I stood at the edge of someone else's conversation and smiled. I left Priya's message on read. I drove to Dale's place in Berthoud that night and slept on his couch. I want to tell you what the next few days looked like, not because they were dramatic, they weren't, mostly, but because I think the days after a breaking point are where the real story lives. Adrian called at 7:45 the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 8, and again at 8:37. The voicemail she left was not what I expected. It wasn't an apology. It was a version of the night told from the inside of her experience. She'd been stressed about the party. She'd been managing 20 logistics at once. She hadn't meant it the way it came out. People were asking where I was. It was embarrassing. Could I please come home so we could talk about this like adults? I noticed, listening to it, that the word sorry did not appear. I called her back at noon. "I'm not coming home today," I told her. The silence on her end had a quality I hadn't heard before, not anger, something more complicated. "Where are you?" she asked. "Dale's." "Are you serious right now?" "Yeah." "Seth, it was a comment, at a party. I was stressed and I misspoke. You're acting like I know what you said," I told her. "And I know it wasn't just a party comment. We both know that." Another silence. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means I've been stepping out of the frame for about 4 years, and I finally just did it literally." I heard her exhale. "I don't know what you want from me," she said. "I know," I said. "That's actually part of the problem." I stayed at Dale's for 3 days. On the second day, I drove to a coffee shop on the south side of Fort Collins, a place called Wolverine Farm Public House on Lincoln Avenue, the kind of place with exposed brick and good espresso and people who are actually doing work on their laptops rather than pretending to. And I sat there for 3 hours thinking about my life with the kind of clarity that only comes when you've removed yourself from the noise of it. Here is what I knew. I loved Adrienne. That was real, and I didn't want to pretend otherwise. But I had been treating love like a justification for tolerance, like the presence of genuine feeling was sufficient evidence that a situation was sustainable, and those are not the same thing. I thought about the pergola again. In landscape architecture, we talk about the difference between plants that are surviving and plants that are thriving. They can look similar, from a distance. Both are technically alive, but one is in the wrong soil, the wrong light, the wrong drainage. It may persist for years, but it never flourishes. And the gardener who calls that persistence success is a gardener who has confused the absence of visible failure with health. I had been in the wrong soil for years. I had called it a good marriage. On the third day, Adrienne drove to Berthoud. Dale let her in, gave me a look, and went to work in his shop. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and she looked, for the first time in a long time, genuinely present. Not performing, not managing, just there. "I need you to tell me honestly," she said. "Is this about more than the party?" "Yes." "How much more?" "Years more." She looked at the table. She was quiet for a while. "I know I've changed," she said finally. "I know the business took over in ways I didn't anticipate. I know I've been difficult." "You've been absent," I told her. "Not difficult, absent. And then when you were present, you were critical. And I told myself that was just your personality. But I don't think it is. I think it became your default because I never pushed back." She looked up. You never pushed back because you were never here either. That landed, because it was partly true, and I told her so. You're right, I said. I buried myself in work and called it providing. I don't get to claim the moral high ground on this one, but there's a difference between two people who are both struggling and pulling in the same direction versus two people who are both struggling and slowly becoming strangers. Which are we? She asked. I thought about her voicemail, the way the word sorry had not appeared. I don't know yet, I told her. We did not reconcile over that conversation. I want to be honest about that. What we did was begin, for the first time in years, an actual honest conversation, not a managed one, not one where she was performing calm and I was performing contentment. A real one, with sharp edges and long silences and a few moments where both of us said things that we needed to hear out loud. She told me she had felt invisible in a different way, that my work, my projects, the landscape that had become my identity, had crowded her out of my attention in ways that made her feel like a set piece in my aesthetic. That my love for the garden was something I gave more consistently than I gave my love for her. That hurt, because I recognized it. I told her that her constant curation of our life, the Instagram page, the dinner parties, the way she would tell stories about us that featured me as a pleasant background element, had made me feel like a supporting actor in a production I was supposed to be co-starring in. She was quiet for a very long time after that. I didn't know you felt that way, she said. I didn't know how to say it, I told her. I kept thinking it was something I should be above, something a secure man wouldn't be bothered by. That's not how it works, she said, and her voice was different now, softer, tired in a way that felt real. You're allowed to need things from a marriage, Seth, even obvious things, even things you think you shouldn't need to ask for. I moved back home after a week. We started seeing a couples therapist, a woman named Dr. Lauren Briggs, who worked out of an office on Harmony Road with good light and a succulent on the windowsill that I, professionally, recognized as a well-cared-for Echeveria. I took that as a good sign. Dr. Briggs did not let either of us run our usual scripts. She had a way of sitting very still and letting silence accumulate until the managed version of a person ran out of steam and the real version showed up. I appreciated this about her. In our third session, Adrian said something I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She said, I think I started building the version of our life I wanted people to see because somewhere along the way, I started confusing that with building the life I actually wanted to live. Dr. Briggs asked, and what's the difference? Adrian thought for a long time. One has Seth in it, she said. The real Seth. Not a prop version. That's the moment I cried. First time I'd cried in years, probably. I'm not proud of the gap, but I'm honest about it. I want to tell you where we are now, because I think stories that end too neatly are lies, and stories that end in pure destruction don't give you anything useful to hold on to. Here is the actual truth. We are still married. We are in therapy, weekly. It is hard. There are sessions where I drive home feeling like someone has disassembled something fundamental and left me with the parts, not quite sure how they fit back together. There are also sessions where I feel something I can only describe as the relief of finally being in the correct soil. Adrienne deleted the Instagram page. She told me she had been thinking about it for months, but hadn't been able to pull the trigger because the metrics had become a kind of external validation that she was using to replace something internal she hadn't dealt with. Those were her words. They were good words. I hired help for the busy season, something I'd been too stubborn and too convinced of my own necessity to do for years. Turned out, delegating did not destroy my sense of self. It mostly just gave me Saturdays back. We went to Santa Fe. 6 months after the birthday party. We stayed at a place on Garcia Street, walked Old Town, ate green chile at a counter spot on San Francisco Street that had no aesthetic whatsoever and was perfect. No photographer, no string lights. Just two people who were trying, imperfectly and honestly, to be in the same frame again. The night before we drove back from Santa Fe, we were sitting outside the hotel in one of those wooden chairs they leave out for guests, and the sky over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains was doing something ridiculous with color. The kind of sunset that you cannot design, that simply arrives. Adrienne said, I want to be someone you don't have to step out of frame for. I said, I want to stay in the frame this time. She reached over and held my hand. Not a grand gesture. Not something for a photo. Just her hand in mine in the dark while the last light left the mountains. I don't know what the next years will look like. I know the work is not finished. I know there are still conversations ahead that will require the same difficult honesty we've been practicing. I know that trust, once fractured, does not reassemble the way it broke. It reassembles differently, with different evidence of where it's been. But here is what I have learned, and I want to say it plainly because I think it matters. Being willing to leave, not to punish, not to perform, but because you finally hear clearly what has been quietly true for a long time, is not a failure of love. It can be the first honest act love has witnessed in years. The moment I walked out of that frame, I stopped pretending. And the strange thing about stopping pretending is what it creates space for. In landscape architecture, we call it a reset. You come across a garden that has been managed into compliance. Every unruly plant trimmed, every natural tendency suppressed, everything shaped according to someone else's idea of how it should look. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop managing it. Pull back. Let what's actually there become visible. And then decide with honest eyes what you want to grow. That's where Adrian and I are. Not in the garden we designed to look good. In the actual garden, with all its overgrowth and dead sections and surprising places where something is quietly, stubbornly still alive. I don't know yet what it will become, but for the first time in years, I'm actually looking at it. Priya texted me again, about a month after the party. She said she hoped we were doing okay. She said she felt bad about the text she'd sent that night, that she'd been put in the middle of something she didn't fully understand. I told her she hadn't done anything wrong. She'd reached out with kindness to a person she thought might be hurting. You can't fault someone for that. I told her we were working on it. She said, "Good. You're one of the few husbands in that circle who actually seemed like a real person." I laughed. Then I thought about it longer than I probably should have. And I decided that being a real person, visible, present, occasionally inconvenient to the aesthetic, was the only version of myself I was willing to be from now on, even if it ruins the frame, especially if it ruins the frame. You know what gets me about Seth's story? He didn't leave because she was a bad person. He left because he finally got tired of being invisible in his own life. And that's the part nobody talks about. Sometimes the most dangerous kind of hurt isn't the loud kind. It's the quiet kind. The kind that shows up in small moments, over years, until one day you're standing outside your own backyard, wondering how you got so far from yourself. If someone in your life is making you feel like you don't belong in the frame, hear me on this. That's not love. That's management. You are not a prop. You are not background noise. And the moment you stop accepting that treatment is not weakness. It's the bravest thing you'll ever do.